It's Miller time. I literally drew a watch on my hand and wrote Miller time. In a surprising move, the Seattle Mariners brought up top-rated pitching prospect Bryce Miller from Double-A Arkansas to start on Tuesday versus the Oakland Athletics. Obviously, losing Robbie Ray was a big blow to the team, and then they've been trying to scramble to figure out what to do ever since then. We've seen Chris Flexen start in that spot, we've seen Easton McGee start in that spot, and now we're going to see Bryce Miller start for where Robbie Ray was going to pitch in the rotation. But is Bryce Miller here to stay, or is this just a spot start for the Seattle Mariners? And also, what does this mean for the rest of the rotation? Because Logan Gilbert was supposed to start on Tuesday. Is there something wrong with Logan, or is this just moving everybody back? Well, first, let's start with the roster move that's going to make room for Bryce Miller on this roster, and that was, of course, outrighting Diego Castillo off the 40-man roster down to Triple-A Tacoma. Diego decided to stay with the team instead of accepting going to free agency, where he would have forfeited his entire 2023 contract. So Bryce Miller will be facing off against the Oakland Athletics tomorrow in Oakland, against Mason Miller. Listen, I'm no stats guy, right? I don't know these things, but I'm just assuming this is the first time in history that a guy has made his major league debut against someone with the same last name. Don't quote me on that, I'm just guessing. So let's look at Bryce Miller's numbers down in Double-A Arkansas and just see why this was such a surprising move to me, because honestly, of all the guys down in Double-A Arkansas, he was probably second or third on the list of prospects I would have expected to get called up. Honestly, he was probably behind Emerson Hancock and maybe even Brian Wu at this point for me. And the reason behind that is that honestly, Bryce Miller has kind of struggled so far this year. In his 2023 stats, he's 0-2 with a 6.41 ERA, albeit in just 4 games, with 18 strikeouts in just about 20 innings pitched, with a 1.32 whip. But to understand Bryce Miller's season thus far, we have to dive into his numbers a little bit. Let's go game by game, his 4 starts, and see just what Bryce Miller has offered at Double-A. In his first start on April 6, Bryce Miller went just 4.1 innings pitched with 7 hits, 4 runs, 4 of which were earned, only 4 strikeouts, and he gave up 1 home run. Miller, however, did throw 77 pitches, 50 of which for strikes. Notice how he didn't walk anybody here, which is a big deal. In his second start on April 13th versus the Springfield Cardinals, Bryce Miller pitched 5.2 innings with 6 hits, 4 runs, 3 of which were earned. He struck out 6 and gave up a single home run. And again for Miller, his strike percentage was pretty high. He threw 80 pitches, 60 of which were for strikes. In his third start, Bryce Miller went 4.2 innings pitched. He gave up 9 hits with 6 runs, all of which were earned, and he walked 2, the first time he had walked anybody all season. He only struck out 3 and gave up 2 big home runs. Even with walking 2, Bryce Miller's strike percentage was still pretty good, with 87 pitches thrown, 57 of which were strikes. This left Miller with a 7.98 ERA on the season. And at this point, you kind of look at him and be like, where is this guy that we have seen over the past few years and the guy we saw in spring training? And then finally, we get to his last start in Double-A thus far. Bryce Miller went 5 innings pitched. He only gave up 1 hit. That 1 hit was a home run. He struck out 5 and walked 1. And in that game, Bryce Miller had 85 pitches thrown, 55 of which were strikes. For the Mariners, Bryce Miller is their number 2 prospect behind Harry Ford, at least on MLB.com's prospect rankings. He's just 24 years old. And when you look at Bryce Miller's career, you can see the command was always something he had to work on. He struck out 163 batters in 2022, but he also walked 46 of them. That was good for a 3.5 strikeout to walk ratio in 2022. Whereas in 2023, Bryce Miller has a 6 strikeout to walk ratio. So the command for Bryce Miller is something that the Mariners are seeing out of him that is like, hey, man, this guy could actually come in and play in the major leagues. And honestly, name a better place as a pitcher to start your career right now than against the Oakland Athletics at home. It's going to feel like a minor league game because there's going to be 5 people there. Joe's going to be one of them, so you know you have a Mariners fan on your side. And then you're going to be facing one of the worst lineups in all of baseball. Easton McGee was able to shut down the Toronto Blue Jays. I would love to see Bryce Miller versus the Oakland Athletics. Of course, not all starts are created equal, but what does this mean for Bryce Miller? Is he sticking around for the Seattle Mariners? And even with his sort of rough numbers this season, why did the Mariners give him the call? Well, first, listen to this little blurb from Jerry Dipoto on the 710 Seattle Sports Network talking about losing Robbie Ray and how the guys down on the farm are pitching thus far.
Close then are some of those Double-A pitchers to being big league ready right now? What kind of year have they had and how close are they?
You know, the starts have been uneven, but we're, as you know, we tend to, we assess differently. We're looking more often than not, we're looking at those shove reports, and we've talked about them before, and we want to know how the pitchers are executing in 0-0 counts, in 1-1 counts, what the physical stuff looks like, and the ability to repeat it. Because, small sample sizes in raw performance can really, they tell all of the truth. And, to that extent, some of them are closer than others. We're very pleased with what's happening under the hood with most of the guys. And it makes them options, and we do have a couple of guys in Tacoma that are off to good starts and they're doing positive things. And we also have 5 healthy starters in the big leagues right now. So it is not dire straits for us. We're going to have to make an adjustment, but we want to make an adjustment that allows us to thrive, not an adjustment that allows us to survive.
Jerry goes in to say that, hey, we're not looking specifically at the one-on-one results. We're looking at the reports and seeing how is this guy throwing pitches in what counts? How is he attacking hitters? Is he throwing strikes? Is he throwing first pitch strikes? So on and so forth. And it turns out that's actually exactly what Bryce Miller was doing. According to Ryan Divich, when he had talked to some scouts, those scouts wondered if Bryce Miller wasn't working on some things in terms of pitch selection in certain counts. None of them said he was bad. So basing what Jerry Dipoto said and then looking at what Divich had to say, the fact that Bryce Miller may have just been working on some pitches in certain counts. Let's say in a 1-2 count, Bryce Miller wanted to work on throwing his fastball up and in, then maybe that is something that he was working on and maybe it was getting hit around a little bit. And they learned that. They know now that, hey, that's not going to work for you. So if Bryce Miller is the guy that we saw in 2022, someone who has been able to dominate minor league players and can hopefully have that translate into the major leagues, and maybe he's not going to have to work on these things with maybe Cal calling the game, right? You have Cal Raleigh behind the plate calling pitches for you. You're going to be in a much better spot. Then maybe Bryce Miller is here to stay. Or maybe it's just a spot start, and there's one big reason for that in my opinion. So with Bryce Miller lined up to pitch on Tuesday, that means that his second start, if he was to stay in the big leagues, would be Sunday against the Houston Astros. Talk about going from one side of the spectrum to the other, man. You pitch to the Oakland Athletics, and then you have to pitch to the defending World Series champs. If anyone could do it, it's Bryce Miller, but my goodness, that's trial by fire. But then we also have to wonder what that means for Logan Gilbert. Is Logan Gilbert just getting pushed back a day so he will start on Wednesday instead? Or is Logan Gilbert getting skipped in the rotation because maybe he's starting to develop, I don't know, a blister or something like that from throwing his splitter so much? Logan Gilbert is a guy who we've looked at pretty strongly so far this season as a guy who may be nursing a small injury that we're not aware of. I think it was his first start where his velocity was a little bit down and people were saying, is Logan hurt? But so far he's been pretty good, so I guess he said there's no reason to be concerned, so why should we be? And the Mariners could also just be reshuffling the rotation to get their best pitchers going up against the Houston Astros. Because with the call-up of Bryce Miller, right now the 3 pitchers that are going to face the Astros, if the Mariners just push Gilbert back a spot and then stay in line, are going to be Luis Castillo on Friday. Good, as it should be. And then we're going to have Marco Gonzalez on Saturday. And then Bryce Miller on Sunday. Having Marco Gonzalez face off against the Oakland Athletics compared to the Houston Astros, well, you got to feel a lot better about Marco facing the Athletics. And having George Kirby and Logan Gilbert both miss a start against the Houston Astros, I honestly would rather have them in those games than maybe even Bryce Miller and Marco Gonzalez. Again, I think Bryce Miller is going to be great, but it's kind of hard to just say, hey man, go get the defending World Series champ, the guys who ended our season on this field last year. Go get them, pal. In terms of the way the rotation would look, we'd have Bryce Miller here on the 2nd, Logan Gilbert on the 3rd, George Kirby on the 4th, and then it would go Luis Castillo, Marco Gonzalez, Bryce Miller, then Logan Gilbert again, George Kirby, and Luis Castillo. So you would have your 3 top starters going against the Texas Rangers. Maybe that's what the Mariners want to do, but I would not be shocked to see this rotation shuffled around a little bit to hopefully get Logan Gilbert another turn in the rotation against the Astros instead of maybe Marco Gonzalez. Of course, this is all speculative right now. One thing is for sure, for better or for worse, it's Miller time, baby. Bryce Miller is in the major leagues and he is going to do some damage against the Oakland Athletics. At least we can hope. And speaking of doing damage, remember all the home runs the Mariners hit in April? Yeah, Joe does, and he made a video about it. It's on the screen now. Check that one out, and go Mariners.